February 23, 1945. Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto hunched inside a concrete shelter, his hands shaking as he penned words that would have led to his execution had they been found by superior officers. The Marines are not like ordinary humans. Death does not claim them as it does other men. Every statement we heard about American frailty was false. Through the slit for firing, he had just seen something that challenged all the beliefs hammered into him during instruction. 6 Marines assaulted his location in the face of relentless machine gun fire. 3 were killed, but the remainder pressed forward. Despite a hail of grenades from his fellow soldiers, 1 Marine used his body to absorb the explosion and protect his team, then carried on fighting through grievous injuries until he lacked the strength to grip his firearm. Within minutes, the remaining Marines seized the area. There were 21,000 Japanese troops stationed at Iwo Jima, entrenched across 18 kilometers of tunnels and defensive works. They had been assured they would confront soft American forces who would give way under stress. Instead, what awaited them defied everything the Imperial Japanese Army's experts had projected about their foes. The consequences of this error were not being documented on tactical charts, but rather expressed through the brutal experience of close combat that would see 26,000 Marines wounded or killed in just 36 days. Japanese morale had started to falter before Iwo Jima. August 7, 1942. Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, who had previously served in China where Japanese troops appeared unstoppable, chronicled his thoughts in a diary following the initial week of battle. The Americans who landed are unlike any adversary we have faced before. They hold their ground even when surrounded. They refuse to give in when their situation seems futile. Most unsettling, they engage during the night as though darkness empowers them rather than instills fear. Guadalcanal marked the Japanese military's initial attempt at defense in the Pacific, with leaders expecting a straightforward triumph against untested American opponents. The 1st Marine Division that landed totaled slightly over 16,000 troops. Japanese Army analysts had identified Marines as formidable, but still regarded them as Americans shaped by a gentle, freedom-loving culture prioritizing personal ease over group sacrifice. Yet, within a matter of days, each of these beliefs was fatally discredited. Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome led a reinforced unit assigned to recapture Henderson Field on the night of August 20. His contingent of 200 men had previously overpowered Chinese units triple their number. They advanced perfectly in line with established doctrine, confident that Americans would fall into disorder in the dark. Marines had dug in with overlapping lines of fire, ready for them. Fukudome's force entered a trap of deadly fire. What unfolded ran contrary to Japanese tactical principles. Instead of simply digging in, the Marines instantly launched a counteroffensive into the night wielding automatic weapons with lethal accuracy. After Fukudome's death 3 days later, his diary, which was found, expressed his disbelief. They assaulted us after dark. Night attacks have always been our tactic. They moved through jungles we considered impassable. They killed quietly, then disappeared. When the sun rose, I had only 90 men left in my company. The Americans suffered 12 casualties. The same cycle appeared repeatedly at Guadalcanal. Japanese soldiers, used to opponents who collapsed in the face of banzai charges, met Marines who stayed at their posts until physically overcome, then engaged in savage close combat using bayonets, knives, and bare hands. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, who endured 4 months on Guadalcanal before being rescued, wrote in a letter that was intercepted by American intelligence. We were instructed that Americans value the individual and would not risk themselves for others. This is untrue. First observed a Marine with both legs shattered continue to fire his machine gun until Japanese soldiers finished him at point-blank range. Without pause, his assistant picked up the weapon and resumed firing. We lost 40 soldiers to that position. The Marine training responsible for producing such soldiers confounded Japanese military experts. Private Yamamoto, who would later engage in combat with Marines on Iwo Jima, first heard about them in intelligence briefings given in 1943. The staff officer leading the briefing had interrogated captured Marines and appeared visibly unsettled. American Marines received training that would be labeled as criminal mistreatment in any other modern military force. They are mentally and physically broken down, only to be reconstructed into individuals who scarcely resemble the untrained civilians they once were. Their lessons include perceiving death in battle as honorable, refusing to surrender, and fighting on until rendered incapable. This sounds like something we've heard before. Indeed, they have adopted our Bushido spirit, yet integrated a factor we did not foresee: the scale of American industrial production. The resulting combination was catastrophic. Japanese troops, educated under the Bushido Code, were conditioned to accept death before dishonor, but they fought with weapons progressively outmatched by American arms. Marines were subjected to training nearly as rigorous as that of Japanese forces, molding fighters equally ready to sacrifice themselves. However, these Marines stormed ashore equipped with overpowering weaponry that rendered Japanese defenses indefensible. On November 20, 1943, Tarawa Atoll, Rear Admiral Ki Shibasaki led 4,500 men in fortifications believed to be unassailable. The 2nd Marine Division disproved this notion in a mere 76 hours. Private First Class Tadashi Agawa, among only 17 Japanese who survived, recounted his experience to interrogators. The first wave was annihilated in the shallows. We killed hundreds of them. More landing craft approached. The next wave perished on the shoreline. Yet more followed. The third wave advanced as far as our lines, wielding flamethrowers. They persisted until only one side remained alive. The statistics were merciless. Nearly 6,410 men perished on Tarawa within 76 hours. The Marines who emerged alive proved willing to seize any target, regardless of losses. Documents seized at Saipan in 1944 exposed Japanese intelligence assessments that labeled Marines as, quote, shock troops with a fanatic dedication to their goals. Marines do not obey retreat orders and will mount counter-assaults even when at a tactical disadvantage. Suffering inflicted on Marines does not diminish unit function unless the formation is wiped out completely. End quote. This evaluation was formed through careful analysis. Captain Yoshio Kobayashi, who made it through Guadalcanal, gave comprehensive comparisons. Standard American Army infantry tactics are sensible and orthodox. By contrast, the Marines proceed with relentless aggression, unfazed by mounting losses. They absorb casualties at rates that would compel any logical commander to call a halt. Such behavior is without precedent. The rapid pace of Marine maneuvers was as destructive as their weaponry. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, who led troops on Pelu, drafted his defenses relying on precedents where U.S. forces would pause post-landing. The Marines never halted. They hit the beach at 8:30 on September 15 and secured half the airstrip by the evening. Nakagawa documented his astonishment in his diary. My defense collapsed because I believed the enemy would behave in a rational manner. The Marines do not operate rationally. They function with absolute dedication, indifferent to the situation. This unwavering resolve appeared suicidal to Japanese witnesses but achieved devastating success. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, who was taken prisoner on Bougainville, recounted witnessing a Marine platoon launch an attack against a heavily fortified hilltop defense. The men had to cross exposed terrain raked by machine gun fire coming from 3 different bunkers. According to Japanese military practice, such an assault would have begun with prolonged artillery bombardment, followed by infantry advancing under a cover of smoke. In contrast, the Marine lieutenant sized up the enemy's position for maybe 30 seconds before ordering an immediate assault without any preliminary preparation. The platoon rushed headlong into the barrage of fire. 7 Marines were hit within the first 20 seconds. Those who survived reached the first bunker and neutralized it using grenades and demolition charges. As they pressed on to attack the second bunker, 3 more men were lost. The rest managed to capture this position. The last 5 Marines continued and seized the third bunker. To overcome a position we had deemed unassailable, the platoon sustained 12 casualties from a total strength of 37 men. The entire sequence lasted only 4 minutes from the issuing of the order to its completion. This was not a matter of bravery. It was a calculated use of acceptable losses to accomplish their mission more quickly than we were able to react. The notion of tolerating acceptable casualties was deeply unsettling to Japanese officers, who had been trained to prize their soldiers' lives, insofar as it served the successful completion of tasks. The Marines considered casualties as the price of success and were willing to pay that price without second thought if the goal warranted it. This mindset produced a psychological edge that went beyond material power. Recognizing that Marines would press the assault even with the risk of losing half their numbers, Japanese commanders faced unsolvable dilemmas. Defend with too few troops and you would lose the ground. Commit adequate forces, but then weaken your hold on other vital positions. Alternatively, abandon the strongpoint entirely and cede territory. Defeat was inevitable regardless. The only question was how long it would take. Major Yoshi Takahori, who was the senior staff officer on Iwo Jima and survived that battle, assessed this predicament during interrogations after the war. General Kuribayashi realized that stopping the Marines outright was beyond our means. Our defensive plans were intended to stall them and cause the highest number of Marine losses possible. In this, we succeeded exceptionally, causing over 20,000 Marine casualties dead or wounded within a span of 36 days. Such losses would have crippled the offensive capability of any other military. The Marines, however, simply brought in replacements and maintained their onslaught without losing any momentum. We had estimated that dealing 10,000 casualties would halt their progression for a minimum of a week. They lost 10,000 men during the opening week, yet their advance was undeterred. This exposed the profound disparity. Their ability to replace lost men surpassed ours. The Americans had 50 Marine divisions either engaged in the Pacific or training back home. We, on the other hand, had only a set number of defenders for each island. The outcome was determined by mere numbers. These calculations took into account more than just troop strength. Marine forces landed with logistics in place that supported extended operations at levels the Japanese could not equal. Second Lieutenant Toshio Yamamoto, who was taken captive on Saipan, observed this difference for himself during a clandestine night approach. 3 days after the American landing, I led a patrol to reconnoiter their lines. We anticipated encountering worn-out soldiers with scant supplies, similar to what we would have faced after 3 days of heavy fighting on a contested beachhead. Yet, we encountered Marines dining on hot meals, being resupplied with ammunition by trucks, medical tents tending the wounded from Tomatum, and rest areas for rotating units off the front lines. Inside their stockpiles were reserves of ammunition exceeding those possessed by my whole regiment. They operated field kitchens cooking fresh food. They had mobile shower and laundry units. While engaged in the most savage conflict of the Pacific theater, their living standards surpassed what we experienced in peacetime barracks. This was proof that defeating their forces was out of the question. They would never suffer shortages of rations, ammunition, medicine, or manpower, whereas we inevitably would. The determined American supply apparatus established a warfare of attrition that ultimately worked in favor of the Marines, even when initial casualties were steep. Japanese troops fought from static defenses with limited resources and without backup. Their losses could not be replaced. Every bullet they used was one less for future defense. Conversely, the Marines expanded from a growing beachhead, receiving a continual flow of supplies by sea and air. Wounded were evacuated and replaced by new soldiers. Ammunition supplies were inexhaustible. The longer the fight dragged on, the more depleted the Japanese became while the Marines gained strength. This shift proved decisive during the battle for Peleliu, with Colonel Nakagawa's defensive effort extending from September 15 through November 27. The 1st Marine Division experienced such significant losses that it had to be withdrawn and replaced by forces from the 81st Infantry Division during October. A second Marine division remained operational until Army forces took their place. The fight, which Japanese strategists had anticipated would last a single week, extended over a period of 11 weeks. Japanese troops inflicted more than 10,000 American casualties, yet the Americans could bear these losses and keep pressing their attacks. Japan was unable to defend every island at such a high price. The mathematics of the situation were unsustainable. By the middle of 1944, the impossibility of this approach became apparent to Japan's military leaders. Intelligence reports shared with garrison leaders recognized that halting the Marines was impossible. At best, their advance might be slowed. A captured document on Tinian offered instructions that made it plain any hope of victory had been entirely forsaken. When combating a Marine assault, one should not expect to permanently hold defensive positions. The aim is to buy enough time for the American advances to be slowed, thereby supporting other strategic goals. Every extra day of holding out holds value. Every Marine killed or incapacitated is important. Still, recognize that the position will inevitably fall. Make preparations with this in mind. Fill defensive sites with as much ammunition as possible. Build backup fortifications. Organize a planned retreat through successive lines of defense. Accept, too, that death during the defense is likely. Such sacrifices gain time for the Japanese Empire. There is a measure of honor in making this sacrifice. Even if victory is out of reach, this somber set of calculations dictated the Japanese approach to defending islands during the last year of the war in the Pacific. Defensive troops no longer aimed to win engagements. Instead, they hoped to exact such high costs in battle that American forces might opt to negotiate rather than launch an invasion of Japan. By accepting casualties that would have broken other armies, the Marines rendered this tactic ineffective. They paid the required cost and continued to push forward. No price was considered too great. No defensive line was deemed unbreakable. The offensive advance never paused. Private Tadashi Gawa, one of the Tarawa battle's few Japanese survivors, later spoke about the psychological toll of facing such a foe. On the initial day of combat, we realized defeat was inevitable. The Marines arrived with overwhelming numbers. Their naval artillery decimated our defensive works. Their aircraft bombed us constantly. Nevertheless, we convinced ourselves we could make them pay so dearly that they might rethink further amphibious assaults. But we witnessed them attacking again and again despite severe losses. They marched straight into machine gun fire that killed many. More Marines advanced behind them. We shot at those too. Still, more arrived. For 3 days, we fought with unwavering commitment. We caused thousands of Marine casualties. Nearly every one of us perished, and the Marines secured Tarawa within their planned timetable. They paid the cost we imposed and pressed onward through the Pacific. That's when it became clear to us that the war was lost. An adversary willing to endure any loss in order to secure victory cannot be stopped by escalating the cost of winning. This understanding spread among the Japanese military as survivors from each clash shared their experiences at subsequent battles. By the time the Marines made landfall on Iwo Jima in February 1945, each Japanese soldier comprehended they faced the most relentless adversary in the Pacific theater. They knew death awaited them. They knew the Marines would ultimately control the island. The only uncertainty was how many Marines they could take with them. General Kuribayashi's defensive strategy was shaped by these truths and structured his command decisions around them. His directives to his men acknowledged realities that official propaganda refused to accept. We are unable to win this fight. Our sole objective is to make the Americans pay dearly for every bit of ground gained. This is our directive. Accept the possibility of death. Cause as many enemy casualties as possible. Hold up their progress. Serving the Empire in its darkest time is our duty. This evaluation was proven accurate repeatedly, in one confrontation after another. Continues.